Welcome to 10-5, the official podcast of the OPP Association. I am one of your co-hosts, Scott Mills.
And I am your other co-host, Emily Brown. For those new listeners, the OPP Association represents nearly 10,000 members of the Ontario Provincial Police in Canada. Our members are at the core of everything we do, and they are our greatest strength, and we are dedicated to keeping our members and the public informed about key issues that affect policing across Ontario.
Well, thank you, Emily. Our guest today is the founder and director of Broadleaf Health. Dr. Andrew Ekblad is a psychologist, and he is now a board member with Canada Beyond the Blue. And Canada Beyond the Blue are currently organizing their second annual Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, which is happening on Sunday, June 22nd, 2025 at 11 a.m. on Queen's Park Crescent in downtown Toronto. So our topic today is going to be the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, and we're going to weave in a psychologist perspective about post-traumatic growth. And I think you'll find this quite interesting about the importance of this event for many family members, loved ones, colleagues for post-traumatic growth. So I believe Dr. Ekblad may be coming to us from Honolulu, Hawaii today. So don't really get jealous or anything like that. But welcome, Dr. Ekblad.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. So, as Scott and Emily were saying, I'm a registered clinical psychologist, and my colleagues and I at Broadleaf Health have been working with police officers for over a decade, worked with police officers, communicators, and their family members. And I always like to say police officers, communicators, and family members, I want to make sure that those folks are all included. It also becomes quite a number of words at a certain point. So I want everybody to know that when I say police officers, I do mean police officers, communicators, and family members. Been working with them in offices, police detachments, members' houses if they've got physical injuries that are too severe that prevent them from coming into offices for over a decade. I've got a background of working with associations and services, helping them develop their programming related to police, psychology, mental health, wellness. And before I started working with police officers about a decade ago, I had a background in dialectical behavior therapy, which is an evidence-based treatment for the treatment of emotion dysregulation, impulsivity, and suicide. So the connection between policing and suicide prevention is something that's near and dear to me, and is obviously an important part of the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, which is something that I'm very proud to be associated with now.
Well, thanks, Dr. Ekblad, for taking the time. And before we get too deep into our conversation today, I want to share right off the top some of the details about the upcoming Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. As stated, it's on Sunday, June 22nd, 2025 at 11 a.m. On Queen's Park Crescent in downtown Toronto, and all are welcome to attend. And it is quite an event. I was there last year for the inaugural one, and I believe 52 names were added last year. So if you want to get all the details about it, CanadaBeyondTheBlue.com has all of those details. Basically, it's located opposite Queen's Park, the legislature for Ontario, and the closest intersection is Grosvenor Street and Queen's Park East. And the organizers are saying to consider carpooling or taking public transit or the GO train if possible. And alternatively, there are parking lots within a 10-15 minute walk from the memorial site. So it's not 100% a traditional kind of memorial as we kind of know it traditionally, with a formal march and things like that. But there is a mustering site around Queen's Park that You can come in uniform or out of uniform at 10:15, and at 10:50, the assembled attendees, they walk over to where the ceremony's happening, and that the site for that mustering is on the paved parking lot south of the Legislative Assembly building. So please mark your calendars and plan to come. It was a really, really moving event last year. I'll turn it over to Emily here. She's got some questions for you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. Good description for sure. So, Doctor, let's get into it a little bit. Can you touch on why an event like this, like the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, is so important for loved ones and colleagues alike, in relation to post-traumatic growth? And before all that, maybe go into what exactly is post-traumatic growth.
Sure. So I thought that maybe I would start my description of post-traumatic growth with a brief story. So a few years ago, I was walking through a crosswalk. It was dark, I think very early in the morning. The sun hadn't come up yet. It was foggy, and I was probably wearing dark clothes because it was winter. And I'm walking through a crosswalk, and I noticed in my peripheral vision that there was a car making a left turn and accelerating. So my brain, was of course first terrified, and then I quickly realized that this was a bad situation. Kind of jumped and yelled at the same time, and the car swerved in the other direction at the same time, and I kind of rolled along the side of the car. And I was banged up, but not pancaked. There was definitely a moment there when I thought I was going to get pancaked or maybe killed. And so I have this, as soon as I realize that I'm not seriously injured, I have this surge of emotion, really angry. I gave some feedback to the driver, which was clear and direct and unsolicited. They sped off, and I just noticed that I was shaking. I was thinking about I could have been killed. I was thinking about somebody could run over my kids if they're being so lacking so much care in their driving and not being careful. And so what I found in the days after this was that I was avoiding crosswalks, that I was uncomfortable being near crosswalks, that my kids were young at the time, I was holding their hands a bit more tightly, and I was slipping into not only distress associated with this difficult event, but also avoidance associated with it. And those are kind of like two cornerstones of post-traumatic stress disorder, this distress and avoidance. And so I kind of realized what was going on, and I started doing some things that I thought might be associated with post-traumatic growth to kind of get to the other side of that. And so one thing that can be helpful in addressing post-traumatic growth is using emotion regulation skills that you can learn from a professional. And sort of that might be, for me in this case, it was doing deep breathing whenever I was near a crosswalk where I was worried I might get injured. It was reminding myself the evidence, the facts associated with me getting injured again are actually quite low. Another thing that I did was I started talking about it more and more. I talked about it like I am right now. I talked about it in my own work. I talked about it with friends and family members. And over time, I used it as a way to kind of make some clear points, whether that be clear points about using emotion regulation skills, using clear points about related to trauma, related to post-traumatic growth. And so there was using the skills. A second piece of the way that I handled it was disclosing more, sort of sharing more with others about it. Again, both at work and at home, and also trying to incorporate the story into providing a kind of service to others. Maybe I can help others through this experience. And so, what I was trying to develop, kind of taking this difficult experience, using some of these skills related to post-traumatic growth, I was trying to do a few things. So just generally increase an appreciation for life. That is something that Dr. Richard Teskey, who developed the concept of post-traumatic growth and how to try to increase it. That is something that he's emphasized. Of course, you've got a deeper appreciation of life when you have a sense that it might be at risk. Improve my relationships with others. Developed a sense of new possibilities in life. Develop a new sense of personal strength. And for some people, even developing a sense of spiritual change. So those are some of the components of post-traumatic growth and how I try to develop them in relation to this experience.
So, Dr. Ekblad, can you put kind of into the, a suicide of a police member and their family and kind of the grieving process and where that post-traumatic growth fits into something like the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial event?
Absolutely. So if we take a tragedy like suicide, and we think of this as, of course, the most extreme kind of trauma that anyone could experience, that a family member or loved one could experience. A few of the things that we are hoping might come from the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial that those who attend might experience is, again, related to post-traumatic growth and increased appreciation of life, an increased sense of connection with others. You're there as part of a community. You're not going there and being present on your own, but as part of a community. And we also hope an increased sense of personal strength, that out of this tragedy, it is something that I am able to face, able to be public about, and able to use as a way to connect more with others. So we're hoping that related to post-traumatic growth, that the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial will contribute to an increased appreciation of life, connection with others, and personal strength.
Out of curiosity, do you think or have you witnessed a shift in recent years in policing and mental health in the landscape thereof that has allowed an event like this to be held?
Absolutely. I mean, I actually think that stigma-related mental health and policing sort of efforts are helping the conversation. I think the conversation is improving. I think there's more conversations going on. There's a lot to be done still, of course. And at the same time, police officers and their family members opening up and being more and more transparent about their experience is making things easier for the next officer or the next family member to do the same. So I would never tell a police officer or a family member that they have to share a certain part of their experience or that there's a right or wrong way to navigate the difficulty of trauma. At the same time, I do feel like there are brave conversations that are being had by those who have been through traumatic experiences, including those related to police suicide. So I think that that's helped a lot in opening up the conversation a little bit. And there's also practical things that I think are opening the conversation. Associations and services coming together to increase the availability of benefits for seeking out professional mental health supports. I think that that's a really positive thing because it sends the message, hey, this is something that's important. This is something that we are going to publicly advocate for and encourage you to seek out. And of course, if we think back 10, 15, 20 years ago, the benefits that are now available, it would be a fraction, if anything. And so I see movement both coming out of the conversations, the brave conversations that people are willing to have who have been through these tragedies. And certainly the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial will be a big part of that, but also by organizational efforts to expand benefits, and which is a way of emphasizing that it's important to be naming and addressing concerns related to mental health.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Ekblad. We've got some more questions here for you in our discussions leading up to this. This question popped up. What does it mean to be affected by a policing career without being, quote unquote, disordered by a policing career?
Sure. I think that sometimes we get into thinking that an officer is either well or they are sick. And if they are affected by the career, then that means that they are sick. I like to think of it in terms of we are all affected by our experiences. And as we move forward in life, whether or not we're police officers or family members, we are affected and we all change as a result of that. And I think that sometimes we might get stuck a little bit in thinking, am I the same person I was before the career, or am I a different person? And if I am a different person, maybe that's bad. So this is where I like to talk about if you have changed in some ways, could we think of that as you being affected, as you maybe having gone through both some really positive experiences and some challenging experiences as well, and that these things sort of contribute to a dynamic and learning and evolving experience of who you are. And there's a quote by musician Nick Cave, who I like a lot, and he's actually tragically lost two sons. One of his sons he lost when his son was 14 years old, and he talks a lot about grief and trauma. And one of the things that he has said is we shouldn't attempt to return to a past that no longer exists, but should instead travel to a more meaningful part of our present selves. And so our present self might be different in some ways from the self we were, before coming into the career. And at the same time being affected by both the positive and challenging experiences of the job, the people that you meet, the challenges that you overcome, the challenges that you're still struggling to overcome. It's important to think of that as not necessarily about having to make some transition from I'm well to I'm sick, but rather from the person who I am has changed over time, which makes perfect sense given the dynamic experience of being a police officer.
Interesting. Now, you went into some detail about post-traumatic growth, and I thought it was really interesting. And it's frankly the first time that I've really heard somebody explain it a little bit more. But I was curious, how does one begin to sort of cultivate the post-traumatic growth that you spoke of?
Sure. So Dr. Richard Tedeschi is a psychologist who worked for years on the concept of both identifying post-traumatic growth, but then talking about how it can be cultivated. So I touched on these briefly, but I can try to go into a little bit more depth here. So one piece of things here is emotion regulation skills. So going back to my experience of being struck by a car, which is obviously, I want to be clear that I don't want to equate that with an experience of suicide or the suicide of a family member, only as a jumping off point to talk about some of these issues. So in that experience, one of the things that I did to cultivate growth was use emotion regulation skills. So point one would be using emotion regulation skills. So for me, that was breathing when I noticed distress increasing, and there are certain way people will talk about deep breathing, and that can be a useful way of thinking about it. There's also making sure you've got a heavy focus on a long, slow exhalation when you're breathing. That's known to have a significant impact for people. That was one emotion regulation skill that I used. Another skill related to emotion regulation that I used is sort of what you might sometimes call fact checking, which would be what are the facts to suggest that I'm likely to have life and limb risked again walking through a crosswalk. And so some of the facts that I would look to would be, okay, well, how many times have I walked through a crosswalk and not been hit by a car? And then over time, hopefully, I'm learning, okay, the chances of this happening again are very, very unlikely. So one thing was using emotion regulation skills. A second thing that Tedeschi's really emphasized is disclosure. So sharing with others. And this is a big part of what happens at the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial is it is a community of people coming together, sharing this unwanted tragedy that they have, and being part of a community that they would have never chosen to be part of. But in a way, by going to the memorial and to some extent by embracing being part of that community, there's a bit more of a sense of shared burden. So the disclosing and sharing of the event. And then the last piece here is service, or sort of using the difficult event as a jumping off point for service. And so certainly the developers at Canada Beyond the Blue who initiated the work around the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, they have done an enormous service, and that in some ways has come out of their traumatic experience. And of course, we hope that being part of the memorial lifts the burden of their tragedy. And also that the volunteers who are there, if they have been through an experience of the suicide of a loved one or family member, that again, there's more of a sense of shared burden. So again, factors that we would hope would be contributing to post-traumatic growth here would be improved use of emotion regulation skills, improved use of disclosure or sharing a difficult experience with others, and also a sense of service or doing something for others that can sort of be born out of the tragedy that is bringing everyone together, for instance, at the memorial.
Dr. Ekblad, thanks for that. It's a very valuable explanation, and I think people listening to this hopefully will be able to piece together all of this. It doesn't come easy, and I know like when there's 52 names that were added last year, and that was the first time that had ever kind of happened Ontario wide. I know the OPP, they led by Commissioner Carrique, has a suicide memorial at OPP General Headquarters in Aurelia that's fairly recent. But this is a bigger, broader project here that's encompassing the entire province. And I'm thinking that it's probably going to encompass the entire country at one point. But dealing with, for me, it was kind of like honoring some of my colleagues that didn't make it. And it actually was relieving for me, and I'm not even a close family member, just a colleague. So, and I think talking about that with a professional or a peer supporter or something, it helps a lot too. So that kind of leads into my next question here. It's like, what should police officers, communicators, and their families be looking for when they're looking for a mental health care provider, whether it be peer supporter or professional, that can lead them to some post-traumatic growth?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, Scott. It's something that's really important and something that I've become more and more passionate about over time. So there's a lot of good news here on the professionals available for police officers and family members front. There's more and more clinicians providing services to police officers and family members these days than at any time in the past. And at the same time, it's important that police officers and their family members know that different clinicians sort of come to their work with different experience levels, with different experiences, with different, training. And so a lot of people who are seeking out mental health services don't know this, but I think it's very, very reasonable to not only research the person that you're going to talk to, but even call them up and say, hey, can we talk for 10 or 15 minutes so that I can, ask you a few questions, get a little bit more of a sense of who you are. I'm always happy when people want to do that. I just sort of think like, oh, okay, great. I'm talking to someone who's taking this process seriously. And obviously I want them to have a good experience talking to me. And so for someone to come in as well-informed as possible seems great. So never hesitate to ask a prospective clinician some questions about their experience. So a few things that I would emphasize would be you want a clinician who is knowledgeable about police-related operational and organizational culture, okay? And so Some police officers have told me that psychologists and therapists that they've talked to before just thought that the entire job was stopping bank robberies. And of course, people who know the culture and know policing a bit know that that is very, very rarely the case. And so clinicians and actually the entire area of mental health care loses credibility when a clinician isn't knowledgeable about police culture and the experiences of police officers. So at Broadleaf, I encourage all of my clinicians and will pay my clinicians to go on ride-alongs. I've been on a number of ride-alongs myself in Canada and in the US. I spend as much time as I can in police detachments, talking to, police officers, whether they're at parade or at briefing, in cruisers, all in addition to my regular clinical work. And I just try to be as much of a sponge as possible, understanding the culture and understanding the experience. So I encourage all clinicians to do that. And, if you're a police officer or family member who's thinking about working with a clinician and they're not doing things like that, I would ask them why they're not doing it. Because it's something that I find, police organizations and police officers are usually very open to having clinicians come around and just learn a little bit more about the experience. So is it someone who's knowledgeable about police culture? Is it someone who's taken the time to go out on ride-alongs? Is it someone who's taken the time to participate in trainings that are provided by clinicians like myself and others about police culture? And another thing is, there's a lot of talk about evidence-based practices when it comes to psychotherapy these days. And evidence-based practices are extremely important. And at the same time, there's an increasingly wide range of training related to these evidence-based practices. And so I think it's important that a police officer or family member know not only what services this hopefully police culture knowledgeable person is sort of trained in. So not only the services that they're trained in and providing, but who they were trained by. And do they have certifications that were provided by the treatment developer? And so examples of that would be, for instance, prolonged exposure therapy. It's an evidence-based practice for the treatment of trauma. Dr. Edna Foa, who developed prolonged exposure therapy, has a system, she and her clinic have a system where they will review the work of clinicians and then certify and say, okay, the person who developed this intervention now says that this person is doing this thing correctly. The developers of cognitive processing therapy, so cognitive processing therapy, another evidence-based practice for the treatment of trauma, they have a system where they will review the work that is done by clinicians and make sure that it is being done to the standards of the way that they developed it, and then they will say, okay, you are now certified by us. So not only what the clinician says they are providing, but what kind of certifications they have around it. These are certifications that are available to anyone, certification through the treatment developer, and not all certifications are created equal. So it's important that officers and family members know what to look for when they're seeking out a clinician. And you should be able to draw a pretty direct link between what they say they are doing and the person who developed the thing they are doing.
We're going to circle back to the event itself. And I know some of our listeners might be thinking to themselves, maybe they want to submit a name for inclusion for the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. How would they begin to do that?
Sure. So you can go to the website, which is canadabeyondtheblue.com, and complete the form under memorial section. The police member being submitted has to have been an active Ontario police member during the time of their death. That was part of the original criteria, and at the same time, it has now been expanded to include retired members as well. So we just want everybody to know that originally it was only for members who were active. It is now for active and retired members. If you thought that a loved one might not have been eligible before, that criteria has expanded, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that. The police member being submitted must have died by suicide as a direct result of trauma or injury sustained while performing their job. And then there's a post-submission process once the form's received. what we do is we review the submission to ensure the guidelines have been met and determine whether or not the police member will be included or not in the memorial. We understand that cumulative exposure to on-the-job trauma can significantly impact the mental health of police members, and as a result, the OPSM, and again, that's the abbreviation for Ontario Police Suicide Memorial, is dedicated to understanding the complexities around mental health. And if there's any additional information required, we will follow up and say why we need more information before deciding whether or not to include a name in the memorial. The memorial currently includes the names on the honor roll only. And if a name is put forward through an online process, if that name does not appear, then please let us at Canada Beyond the Blue know, and we will make sure that we review that information.
Well, thanks a lot for that. And I know the website is being updated regularly, and some of the changes you discussed may not be reflected there. But I'm very happy to hear about kind of retired members and members that previously served, because their trauma doesn't go away just because they retired, and oftentimes there's a real risk period there. So my hat's off to everybody at Canada Beyond the Blue for bringing this forward. It's necessary, and it's great to see somebody like yourself taking a real interest in it, and we really appreciate that. So thanks for.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It has absolutely been my honor, and the folks at Canada Beyond the Blue and the folks dedicated to creating the OPSM are really pure at heart with their compassion and their energy. And working with them, I kind of feel like the second touring keyboardist to have joined the Rolling Stones in the last month. It's nice to be connected with them a little bit, and hats off to Dell and Crystal and everybody else at Beyond the Blue who've worked so hard to turn it into an amazing and I think in some ways transformative organization and impactful organization for so many.
We're kind of winding down to the end here of what we planned for today, but I had received so many questions about this event last year. And I know on the website there's some FAQs. So I just went to the website, and I figured we would ask some of the questions that are on the FAQs of the website to a psychologist, and you could elaborate on them if that's okay with you.
Yeah, for sure.
So the first one is, will memorializing officers who died by suicide sensationalize suicide?
No. I've been involved in public suicide acknowledgements and the reduction efforts related to suicide for over a decade, even before I became involved in working with police officers. Again, I worked a lot in suicide prevention before I started working with police officers. And so we hope that the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial is an uplifting event and one that fosters a deep sense of connection amongst those who are grieving. At the same time, this is not a party, and nothing is getting sensationalized here. This is a group of very courageous people coming together who would give almost anything to not have to be there. And it's out of a sense of determination and compassion that the event reduces the chances of being there, and adding more names to the memorial. That's why, in a way, the memorial exists so that the memorial does not grow. And so it is not something that sensationalizes suicide at all. Honoring and talking about possible mental health issues that police members may experience related to their job, it allows us to reduce the stigma that we were talking about a little while ago, how important it is to reduce stigma surrounding issues related to mental health and suicide, and hopefully getting people the help that they need earlier on in their journey. So I want to be very clear. I would, as a psychologist who's been working in the area of suicide prevention for over 20 years, I would not be associated with anything that I had any concern was going to be sensationalizing or glamorizing suicide or bringing attention to it in any way other than as the tragedy that it is, and as those that are left living, something that they have to sort of cope with and grow from together. So it is a bringing together of a community, but it is paradoxically a community that everyone in it wishes they weren't in it. They are there to support each other, but not to sensationalize the tragedy.
Just a follow up that I know Emily's got a few more questions after this for you. Just a follow up about this contagion effect, because we were involved with a discussion quite recently, actually, about how come we don't talk about suicide and basically, and when one happens, and we kind of tiptoe around it. Does this contribute to a contagion effect that we often hear, and that becomes a barrier to certain activities, including this memorial? I'm sure the organizers I know they've gone up against a lot of challenges, but they seem to overcome them. Just wondering if you could comment on the contagion effect.
Sure. I mean, it's a really important question, and it is possible. It's not about, do we talk about suicide or do we not talk about it? And not talking about it eliminates contagion, and talking about it creates contagion. The way that we talk about it is sort of what has the impact here. And so being cautious about and being mindful of the possibility of contagion is really, really smart. And so again, there is no glamorizing or sensationalizing of suicide with the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. I would be, the idea of there being a contagion between people who are talking about suicide, I think I'd be more concerned about it if, for instance, there was talk about, the only way to cope with suffering is to die. At that point, there's a really problematic message. It's a problematic message that is inconsistent with post-traumatic growth. It's a problematic message that, unfortunately, might encourage suicide. And so there are ways of talking about it that can be problematic or that might contribute to contagion. And at the same time, there's a lot of research that says that, for instance, assessing suicide risk, asking someone about whether or not they've been thinking about suicide or planning a suicide attempt, for a long time that was something that clinicians were worried might create contagion. It actually doesn't create contagion. We know that now. All that happens if you assess somebody's risk is you know more about what's going on in their life, and you know more about what you need to be aware of as a clinician, which that's, of course, good things. And so I would say it's important to be mindful that there is a risk of contagion when talking about things, and at the same time, the way that we do things with the OPSM is done in a way where we hope that we are bringing together a community that feels supported. And we also hope that we are doing it in a way where the tragedy of what has happened is front and centered, and that there is nothing good about someone dying from suicide. That what we can only hope for is that those left in the wake can work toward some kind of post-traumatic growth. But again, everyone there wishes that they were not part of this community that is there to, in a compassionate way, support itself, and at the same time is there for a tragic and terrible reason.
Now, Doctor, you've definitely touched on this already, but I'm going to ask this in case you want to expand on it. It's a pretty straightforward question. Why have a separate memorial for those who have died by suicide?
Thanks, Emily. So, we understand the importance of memorializing police officers who've died by suicide, and that it is important to acknowledge their deaths and the grieving loved ones who are left in the wake. And We want to remember the way that they lived and honor their commitment to the community. And we want to create a space where families and loved ones can connect with each other and share the burden. And at the same time, we want to, peacefully and respectfully have a space where those who die in the line of duty are also acknowledged, kind of in the in a different way. And so what we're working toward is two separate Ontario Police two Ontario Police memorials. One dedicated to those who have died in the line of duty, and one dedicated to, as Beyond the Blue has kind of started talking about, because of the line of duty. And so we think that it makes sense for there to be two memorials in that way. And I should say we've had a lot of support and positive connection with loved ones who are on the original Ontario Police Memorial. That's also there at Queen's Park.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. The in the line of duty and the because of line of duty, especially. Sometimes people just don't want to use the term because of the line of duty, and what do you think all that's going? Like, I kind of like it, and what are your thoughts on because of the line of duty as opposed to in the line of duty?
Sure. I mean, it's a I don't know. It's a phrase that I'm comfortable with, which is why I'm using it. And so I would, of course, want to have a conversation and learn more from the person who's uncomfortable with the phrase. I think that there are similarities and differences between when someone dies as responding to a call while they are in the line of duty, or we have these lingering impacts. And so these lingering impacts they're happening while the person is working, and they're happening when the person goes home as well. And so, you might change your clothes. You might change out of a uniform and into your civilian clothes when you leave work. And at the same time, your head goes with you. And what you experience in the line of duty goes with you even when you're not on duty. And so a way of acknowledging these sort of like ongoing stressors that the person might have experienced while on duty, they continue to experience those stressors or traumas when they are off duty. And so that's where I think that language makes sense a bit, because of the line of duty, because these stressors and traumas might be carried when the person is off duty, but it is related to the duty at the same time. And I'm sure that there's interesting and thoughtful perspectives that would differ with that. And I'd, of course, always be open to entertaining those and having a conversation. But that's what I think makes sense about the phrase.
Well, thanks for that, Dr. Ekblad. Getting back just kind of onto these FAQs on the website, there's an FAQ that says, "Is the memorial suitable for children?"
So absolutely. We want the memorial to be a space where anyone who has been affected by police suicide can come and experience being a part of this community, a community that paradoxically we wish did not have to exist, a community that in some ways we would hope does not grow, and a community nonetheless that holds itself up and holds itself together. And there's so many different pieces of and different ripples that come from the tragedy of suicide, and the unique impacts experienced by children are deep and profound and long lasting, and we are not going to tell anybody that it's not the right place for them.
That's great. I'm glad you said that, because I have had that question actually outside of the podcast a couple times. So just to clarify, anyone can attend the event?
Correct. So children, welcome anyone who wants to show their respect for the fallen, associated with any vulnerable group. We are, of course, wheelchair accessible. And so we would welcome anyone who wants to come, whether that be folks from the LGBTQ plus community, any other vulnerable groups who might wonder whether or not they are welcome there. They are absolutely welcomed at the OPSM.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Ekblad. And I just... We're grateful that you took the time to discuss this all with us. It's not often discussed, and I think a podcast is a really good way to kind of get the message out there in a bit of a conversation and get some feeling behind it and really dive deeper into the issues. So you've done an admirable job of that, I must say. And so do you have any last words before we let you go?
Yeah, of course. I just want to emphasize, as a psychologist, as a as a member of Canada Beyond the Blue and associated with the OPSM, members and their families are deserving of acknowledgement. They are deserving of the opportunity to be welcomed into a community with this memorial that recognizes both the positive impacts of their loved ones who have died by suicide, the positive impacts that they had on others while they were alive, but also one that legitimizes the grief of those who carry on in their memory. And police officers are constantly exposed to stressors, both great and small, on the job. And these stressors have an impact. We talked about this idea of affected and not disordered. But police officers and communicators are affected by their job. And their clothes might change when they leave work, but their brain does not change when they leave work. And so the impacts of these stressors affect them, but then affect their loved ones when they go home. And what we're hoping that we're doing at Canada Beyond the Blue, and what we're hoping that we're doing with the OPSM, is creating a shared space to both honor those police officers and create a space for those who came last year and hopefully more who will come this year to share in a supportive and compassionate community that is going a long way, I believe, toward bringing this really important issue out of the shadows. And I really believe that by increasing conversation about the tragedy of police suicide, we are paradoxically reducing the likelihood of future police suicide.
Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, especially coming in from Hawaii.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much, Scott and Emily, for having me.
You have been listening to psychologist Dr. Andrew Ekblad talking about the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial and post-traumatic growth. Links to information that we discussed today can be found in the show notes. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice so you never miss an episode. New episodes are being released each month. If you have any questions for Andrew or have any ideas for future episodes, please email us at communications@oppa.ca. Until next time, thanks for listening and stay safe.